Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2024 Kia Telluride. If you install a hitch on your Telluride, it might be a good idea to pick up some trailer wiring harness. Obviously if you plan on towing a trailer, but it is one of those things that's nice to have. That way if you do need to pull a trailer, you'll have this ready to go, and that's going to give you the light signals for your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights to the trailer, and that's going to keep you safe and legal. Now this one in particular is actually a pretty new kit. For a while the Kia Tellurides had a CAN bus system and it required using a universal splicing. That's not the case here. This is a plug-and-play kit, which is really nice. For a while there wasn't any options. And this one, we have it on an X Pro. This kit's only going to work with those other trim levels. It will not work with the LX or the S model, so that's something to keep in mind. We do have those kits available here at eTrailer. But essentially this works by splicing in. We're using T connectors to just plug into factory style plugs on your taillight, and that's going to give us those turn signals, brake lights, and running lights to our trailer. And all of this routes to a module which is going to keep everything protected. So if there's any shorts or anything, it's not going to feed back and damage anything electric on your vehicle. It's not going to mess with anything from the factory. And it does require, as far as installation, running the power wire up to the battery, but this vehicle is pretty easy. So I'll walk you through step by step, and that way you can get your 4-pole trailer wiring installed on your Telluride. Before we head into the installation, let's kind of take a look at what we're dealing with here. This is our module, and this is where all of our wires come off of, and we'll be making connections with all of them. This is going to eventually live underneath. There's a little pocket that we're going to be taking down a trim piece to get this to mount up, and that's going to really from there we just trace out these wires and run them where they need to go. So let's break these wires down a little bit. We have, first thing, our brown and yellow. This is going to snap into the connector on our taillight on the driver's side. So we are going to need to fish this up once we get our taillights out. Going along with that, we have a green, which is going to be for our right turn signal. And you can see this is quite a bit longer here. It's spooled up. That's so we can run it across over to our passenger side. Normally we'll zip tie that up on the hitch. We also have this white wire with a ring terminal attached. This is going to be for a ground. A lot of times we can find a factory ground to mount this up, or we can use a self-tapping screw. And then we have our black wire here, and you can see that it's already pre-stripped, and that's going to go to our power wire that's included in the kit and eventually run up to the battery. We'll make our connection with our fuse holder and eventually to the 12-volt terminal on the battery. So starting out, we'll get our taillights removed. We're here on our driver's side, and there's this plastic cover, and we're going to need to remove that to get to our hardware. So these little tabs just kind of snap in behind the taillight. So just take your time. There's little slots if you need to put a flathead screwdriver, or a plastic trim tool like this is really helpful to just kind of pry this back. You can put something in that slot, like a flathead screwdriver as I mentioned, and that's going to allow us to get this cover taken out. And we can set this aside, and that's going to give us access to the 3 10mm screws that are holding in the taillight. So we'll get those taken out. And our taillight will start to become loose, but there's going to be alignment tabs that this pops into. And you want to be careful here not to break those or crack your taillights or scratch your paint. So just kind of take your time here. A lot of times what I do is just kind of pull pressure back and just kind of wiggle it back and forth, and then it'll pop out. Our alignment tabs are right here, and they just pop into here. So if you need to pry on it, use a plastic trim tool. You could put some painter's tape here just to prevent any scratches on your paint to pop that off. And once you're at this point, we can go ahead and get our taillight removed from the electrical harness. So just push down on that tab, separate it, and then we can put our taillight aside. We're going to go ahead and do all the same steps that we just did on this taillight on the passenger side. Now we'll head underneath the driver's side, and we're going to find this panel. And this is, again, where our module is going to mount up, but also where we're going to be running quite a bit of our wire. So we're going to remove this. Pretty easy. There's going to be just some plastic push pins on the bottom here, so we'll get those removed first. And there's slots on each side, so you can use a trim panel tool like I have here, or even a flathead screwdriver works. Just make sure you get the whole thing out so you have this top portion. and then the bottom should come with it if you pry on that. Also holding it in is going to be a plastic nut. There's 2 of them that are tucked up in these spots right here. A lot of times if you just kind of put pressure, they kind of come off pretty easily. Since they're plastic, a lot of times taking tools to them is a little tricky because they're just going to want to spin around. So what you do is, if you need to, you can use a 14mm socket and just kind of pull down on the panel as you loosen it. And then with that taken out, we can set that aside. Make sure you have a nice organized spot to keep all your hardware that you take off. And we'll need to get our plugs pulled up so we can tie into our taillight. So the method that we use here is using a fish wire technique. I have an airline tube that works really well. You could probably get away using the power wire that's included in your kit. We're basically just running this down. That way we can tape up our wires, pull them up. It makes it a lot easier than fishing it through here. So there's just a gap here where the fascia meets this mounting bracket. So if you find generally the larger opening is going to be better because these plugs are pretty thick. So I'll just feed this down. And then grab a hold of that end of the pull wire. And we're going to be pulling up the yellow and brown wire. So grab some electrical tape, and since it's kind of a small spot to feed through, I really recommend not doubling it up like this. Try to make this as narrow as possible so that way when we pull this up, it can feed through here. So with that taped on there, we'll just pull this up. And you may catch on things under here, so just kind of help it along underneath. And then pull up. If you're catching on things, don't yank it. Just kind of take your time. You can jostle it around a little bit more. And we'll make sure that we get our plugs pulled up here. So you can see it is pretty tight here. But with this pulled up, I'll get my tape off. And you'll see that these plugs match up to the OEM harness. So pretty simple here. This just tees into it. So you really can't mess this up. You plug this side in, and then this is going to go into our taillight. So at this point, if you want, you can go ahead, grab your taillight, get this plugged in, and then we can actually get our taillight put back in place in the reverse order that we took it off. Now, before we go anywhere else on our module and getting that mounted up, we want to make sure that we have enough slack for our passenger side. And this is just going to route over, and it's going to be the same process that we did on our driver's side. A few things to kind of keep in mind though. We do have our muffler on this side. We obviously don't want this resting on there. So it comes down to just making sure that this is zip tied up and out of the way of the exhaust before pulling it up with a fish wire. And having a hitch already installed makes it really easy to be able to zip tie around that. So I'll get this routed over, pulled up, and plugged in. We can get our taillight put back in place just as we did on our driver's side. Now I'm going to hold off on zip tying this up to the hitch. I have it routed correctly, but this is going to allow me to get my 4-pull mounted up exactly where I want, and then we can zip tie that up as we pull the slack. That way it makes it a little bit easier for mounting up our module. And as far as getting your 4-pull mounted up, there's a few options. You can get a long bracket as well as a short bracket that will give you a nice solid mount. You're going to have to put that all together, but if not, what you can do is just use your safety chain loop and your dust cap, and this is generally a good way to keep your 4-pull attached nice and close to where you'll be hooking up to your trailer. It's also going to keep the elements out by just having this cap on there. So I'm going to mount it up this way, make sure I have enough slack, and then I'm going to pull my wires over and get these zip tied up. A quick way to route your green wire that we did previous to the passenger side. You'll see right above the exhaust, there's this here where the frame rail is. There's a nice pocket. If you pass that through, you can route that up, and that's going to keep it away from the exhaust. And from here, I just zip tied this up. You may need to pick up some additional zip ties to accomplish that. I went ahead and also got the 4-pull zip tied up here, and then I followed this hitch, zip tied it up, and this leaves us with a little bit of extra slack, which is a good thing. Now, while we have this down, it's a lot easier to get your butt connector attached to your power wire. So grab your spool of power wire, and there's going to be a butt connector included in the kit. Something I might recommend is a heat shrink butt connector, because once you crimp this down and heat it up, it's going to seal around the wires, making a nice watertight seal. It's not extremely crucial. It's just a good added protection for later use. The good thing is this does have that panel that kind of protects everything, so don't worry if you don't have one of these. It's just something, if you do have them available, you might want to add this in. So first I'll go ahead and just crimp this down. Grab your spool of wire, and we're just going to strip back about 1/4 of an inch, and then we'll crimp this into our butt connector. Power wire you can leave just attached here. We're going to route that up to the battery, but we want to get our ground mounted up, and the ring terminal is already pre-attached. There's not really a great factory place to mount this, so what we're going to use is the self-tapping screw that's included in the kit. Along here there's kind of a pinch weld where a bunch of the metal goes together. This is going to be a good spot, so with an impact you can go ahead and get this mounted in. Sometimes it helps to have a pilot hole, so if you need to, you can drill a small hole. And when you tighten it down, just make sure that the ring terminal is not spinning around, but don't go too tight. You can actually strip out those threads you just created, so just quick bump there, and that should be good. Now at this point, we know that we have all of our connections at least made off our module, so we can go ahead, we'll get this all kind of tidied up and mounted. The module does have a few different ways you can mount it. You can drill through here and mount that up. You can use the adhesive that comes with this to stick it onto a flat surface, or really you have this main module here, which is a good spot to just zip tie this all up. You can use this hole, we'll get all of our wires bundled up, and that's what I'm going to be doing. So I'll get mine all cleaned up and show you how it looks. This is just going to kind of keep this protected from, you really want to make sure that the module's not rattling around, hitting things. And this should be a good spot here. It's going to keep our ground wire from having tension. So at this point, we'll just get our power wire just kind of pulled back. In fact, I might run it over this wire loom here, and then we can get our plastic panel put back in place, and I'll start routing this up to the battery. Now, as far as routing it up to the battery, there's going to be a few different things that we need to look out for. Exhaust moving parts, any suspension, things along those lines. So I'll get mine routed up and show you exactly where I went, and that way you can get a nice clean path. We have you to know that running the power wire up is actually pretty easy on this vehicle. So I just kind of zip tied it up to this factory wire loom, made my way up over the rear cross member, and then made my way towards our gas tank. So you can see our wire here. Now the underbody panel on this vehicle makes it super easy. It's just a series of 10mm bolts, as well as some of those plastic 14 mils that we had on that cover. And this is going to allow us to run this all the way up and keep it nice and protected once this is back up. And you'll just get your power wire kind of routed over. You'll see this mount here. And then we're going to be using a fish wire technique just like the taillights. I went from the battery side, which is on the driver's side, and passed this down. That way we can get this wire pulled up. So up top with our pull wire, we'll just make sure that we get all of our wire pulled up. We got all the slack taken out from the bottom. And this is going to run to our battery. Our positive post is right here. There's just this little tab. You just lift that up. And what I like to do is get our fuse holder attached to it. Now, very important, don't have the fuse in here until we get everything hooked up. And this is just a loop, so you can kind of set it up the way you want. A lot of times I like to keep them hidden here on the Telluride. It just gives it a little cleaner look. So cutting the wire to where that is able to do that is going to be key. So I'm just going to kind of go right about here. And that's going to allow us to get this attached. Now we are going to need to put a ring terminal on here, and that's included with our kit. So we'll just strip this back, put our ring terminal on, and crimp this down. Just give it a quick tug to make sure that it's going to be on there tight. And as far as the post, we kind of have a few different options here. We'll probably go with this one here, which will be a 10mm socket. We'll just get this loosened up. Now attaching our ring terminal, we do have a few different options here. I'm going to go with this one. It's going to be a 12 millimeter socket, so we'll get this loosened up. And then we can take our ring terminal, place that on the post. And this does kind of sit a little bit recessed here because of the clip. So if you need to, you can put a slight bend. A lot of times once you tighten this down, it's going to make sure that there's flat contact. So I'll put this back on. We'll tighten this down. And now we'll just take the other end of our fuse holder, strip that back. And then our power wire, we obviously have quite a bit of extra here, so you can route that however you want for a nice clean look. And then once you're happy with that, you can cut off the excess and then strip this back. And then I'll be using a heat shrink butt connector again here. You can use the one that's included in your kit. With those connections made, we can now take our fuse and place it in our fuse holder. And I'm going to just zip tie up my wires. Something else you may want to do just to make sure that this closes down is you might have to notch this a little bit just for our wire to be able to fit through here. So you can go ahead and do that. You can cut it. You can use a Dremel. You can kind of use just a pair of snips if you need to. But this will make sure that it looks nice and clean while installed. And before we hit the road and just hook up to a trailer, we want to test to make sure that it's working. And the best way to do this is hook it up to your trailer, run through the light signals on the Telluride, make sure that they're corresponding to the trailer. We're going to be using a 4-pole tester, which is kind of nice for this situation because it keeps it specific to the vehicle to know that it's just the wiring here. Because if you have any issues with your trailer, sometimes that can kind of give you a false negative that it's your car side. So running through our lights, we're going to make sure to check our running lights, our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then also our brakes. Once you confirm that everything's working properly, you've officially installed your 4-pole trailer wiring harness. And that was a look and installation of the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2024 Kia Telluride.